Hey everyone, thank you for showing up for another episode of the Coffee People Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Woldt. Before we get started, if you're interested in the video version of this show, please head to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. It would really help us out. There are a bunch of video features that we can access once our subscriber number gets up to 500. And since this is a new YouTube channel, we're not quite there yet. The link is in our bio and of course on roastwestcoast.com. You can also search Roast West Coast on YouTube or Coffee People on YouTube. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you for the support. Before we get started, you should know that we're participating, or at least trying to participate, in Podcasthon, a global charity podcasting event. The goal of Podcasthon is to draw attention to charities that podcasters support. This episode is dedicated to the Rainforest Alliance. You can find the link to our fundraising page in this podcast show notes. By partnering with farmers, businesses, government entities, and much more, the Rainforest Alliance seeks to mitigate the effects of climate change and support forest communities. The communities that are impacted are often in coffee-producing countries, and their mission overlaps with the needs of many coffee farmers. We've invited the Rainforest Alliance's Senior Relationship Manager with a focus on coffee trade, Kevin Lardner, onto the show. Please support your favorite charities when you can. The link to our fundraising effort is in our show notes and on our website, roastwestcoast.com. And now, on to the show. Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Coffee People Podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Ryan Woldt. The show is presented by Roastar Coffee Packaging. You can find them online at roastar.com. The Coffee People Podcast is part of our Roast West Coast Coffee Network. You can go to roastwestcoast.com to find recaps of this show, our Coffee Smarter podcast, and so much more. If you haven't had a cup of coffee yet, now would be a good time to get one. Our guest on this special Podcasthon episode is Kevin Lardner from the Rainforest Alliance. You can find the Rainforest Alliance online at rainforest-alliance.org. And I actually started a little Coffee People fundraising page. You can find both of those links in this podcast show notes. Kevin, welcome to the Coffee People Podcast. I'm glad you're here.
Thanks, Ryan. Happy to be here.
I should point out I'm drinking a blend of Ethiopian and Colombian coffees today. I'm assuming at some point we're going to talk about where in the world Rainforest Alliance engages, and I'm guessing there'll be at least something in that arena. You have a long title. I didn't say it in the intro on purpose because I wasn't quite sure exactly where to go with it. It's kind of a dual title.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you do at the Rainforest Alliance?
Yeah, sure. It is a little long. Maybe that's something I need to remedy. But effectively, my work is oriented around our certification program. That's the bulk of the work that I do. A lot of my orientation is with the trade side of the supply chain. So globally, we have a bulk of RA certified coffee is certified with the support of multinational trading companies, and many of these companies have been working with certification for decades, not only with the Rainforest Alliance, but also with other certifications. And my work is kind of nested with them. So I've been here at RA for about 2 years. And recently, my focus has shifted more towards supply and demand in Latin America, primarily. So that's why it's kind of split up like this. But really, I think about it as kind of nested around certification, other topics related to sustainability and coffee.
The idea that the Rainforest Alliance would even have someone who has a focus on coffee was news to me. When I was looking for coffee adjacent efforts to support for this Podcasthon event, which is like a global charity awareness initiative, Rainforest Alliance wasn't the first place I looked. It was actually recommended to me by someone else. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of an overview on, the Rainforest Alliance and then how coffee is connected into that world.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's also related in some ways to my own path towards the Rainforest Alliance, or RA, as many of us call it in the trade. RA is an international nonprofit organization or an NGO. I think fundamentally the objective of the organization is to try and harmonize the communities that produce a lot of agriculture commodities globally, including coffee, but also others, and to kind of harmonize the people and the nature in which these commodities are produced, to try and ensure that these various commodities, including coffee, can be grown in a sustainable way well into the future. RA has been around for over 20 years, working in coffee. It's in our DNA. The Rainforest Alliance also merged with UTS, which may be familiar to some members of the audience, which is another sustainability certification that was very active in the coffee sector prior to the merger. Many of my colleagues at RA are former UTSIs.
I remember that little
Yeah,
tag. I feel like I remember that, seeing
definitely. And so, we are touching on over 7 million farmers globally and farm workers through our certification programming. We have over 7,000 companies that are working with the Rainforest Alliance, likewise on uncertified supply chains, and in other areas. So we have a strong global reach, but coffee is certainly in our DNA, across a variety of different origins, and in destination countries as well, where you can kind of see the Rainforest Alliance frog on a bag of coffee at your local Whole Foods or Target or wherever.
It's one of the better charity logos out there.
Yeah,
I'll say.
we're very fond of our frogs.
You briefly mentioned it, that your background, you've been with the Rainforest Alliance 2 years, but you have a different background in coffee, and that was part of this journey. I want to get into the details about the certification and why that matters and what it means exactly. But before I do, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about your coffee path. When I set up this podcast with you, and I can't remember if I reached out to the team there, or they reached out to me after a few emails. I wasn't expecting you to have such a long history in specialty. How did you get started with coffee? Do you have a memory that kind of got you started down that path, and how did it get you to here?
Yeah, I mean, this will probably resonate with the audience, but my path is, in some ways, it's not that unique. Like I was a broke college student and I needed cash, and so I walked into a coffee shop where I was going every day to get a coffee before class, and got a job. Eventually, I started working at another coffee bar while still a student that was serving Intelligentsia coffee. This was in Urbana, downstate Illinois, basically. And one thing led to another, right? I had these, in hindsight, really fortunate opportunities to head up to Chicago to visit Intelligentsia's roasting works, meet with the team there, learn more about specialty coffee, the work they were doing. This was over 10 years ago. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do professionally. I had this passion for coffee. I liked the narrative surrounding direct trade. I think it was resonating with me at the time, but I maybe didn't really comprehend either the work that was going into facilitating these connections, or the complexity that was embedded within those networks. So it was something that I was curious about. Ultimately, I went back to school, though. I actually moved to the UK, so I was at a small school in central London that was really oriented around, I guess, like the non-West. And I was studying a variety of different topics related to international relations. I was thinking about this kind of a pathway, international development, maybe sustainability, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And again, I did what I'd done before. I stumbled into a local coffee bar in central London and got a job. And, before you know it, I found myself more interested in the coffee bar than in the library. Eventually, once I finished my degree, I moved back to the States, with this kind of strong sense of maybe nostalgia for the London coffee scene. I mean, this was 2014. There was new coffee bars opening everywhere, new roasteries. I'd go hang out with our team at Square Mile in East London and, taste amazing coffee. And it was really eye-opening, right? And so I wanted to come back, and I wanted to do something similar in my hometown in Chicago. And so I had the opportunity to work on a new coffee bar back then. yeah, that's kind of how it went. So specialty really kind of forged at least my early passion for coffee. A lot of that was driven by the sensory side, also just the thrill of working behind the bar during a busy rush and preparing a lot of coffee and seeing the same faces every day and making them smile and really spreading the joy that I was seeing in the coffee with these communities. So that was kind of where things started and how my path was kind of forged.
You ended up working your way into a couple of different roles at Intelligentsia. In particular, I'm doing this a little bit from memory here, but I believe took on some challenges in buying and
Yeah.
some bigger picture roles than being a barista, which is more, in the moment, we got to get this is done to serve the customer. From there, what made you think I want something different? I want to incorporate this sustainability into my life, and how did that bring you to Rainforest Alliance?
Like I mentioned at the start of my little monologue, Intelligentsia has always been close to my heart. I think that's true for a lot of us who've kind of come around through specialty coffee and have kind of grown up enamored with the work that Intelli has done over decades also in the sector. In that sense, I had this initial opportunity to join the sales team at Intelligentsia. I thought it'd be an interesting way to move up within the sector and build some new connections, but also to learn. I think fundamentally to have more exposure to the business model, to see how I could personally play a part in the mission that was direct trade. That's something that resonated with me then, and I think still does. Some of my moves at Intelli were quite pragmatic. I was there during COVID, which was a very dynamic time for coffee in general, certainly in specialty coffee. I had some big clients who were buying a lot of coffee. A lot of that coffee came from Brazil in particular. And in many ways, I think some more of my exposure to the green coffee side of our supply chain emanated from just pragmatic need. Like people needed coffee. We also had a frost that happened back then, which led to supply constraints and a lot of stressors in our supply chain. So, having the opportunity to meet with more exporters to understand more where Intelligentsia's coffee was coming from was eye-opening. And I was fortunate back then to have leaders within that business who gave me some opportunities to become more embedded in that work and to travel to Brazil to meet with some of these exporters, cup coffee, and help with the purchasing. So that was kind of how the work came about for me. And of course, I always had a strong intellectual curiosity. I wanted to see the farms and to meet some of the people who were producing the coffee that I was selling to my customers, because I felt it would help to strengthen all of those relationships in time.
The Rainforest Alliance certification that we mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
what is that exactly? And, what does it mean when I see that on the bag?
So the Rainforest Alliance certification it's a sustainability standard. So this is not dissimilar to other certifications that your listeners might be familiar with. Fair Trade US. We also have organic certifications that are quite common in the US in coffee. You'll see the seals on a package when you go to the grocery store, sometimes to your local coffee bar. What RA's standard communicates, or effectively attempts to communicate to consumers, is that the commodity in that bag is sustainably produced. Basically, the agricultural practices that are linked to the commodity inside the package is sustainable. And that's a fundamental claim that we seek to communicate with the certification program. The current iteration of our standard, we call it the Sustainable Agriculture Standard, or the SAS for short. Sometimes we use in discussions with companies. It's a long list of criteria. There's a farm standard and there's a supply chain standard. So depending on basically your orientation within the coffee trade, you might have the farm requirements or the supply chain requirements applicable to you, right? But most of the certificate holders we have are farms. And many of these are smallholder farms, so maybe less than a couple of hectares. They undergo this process to be audited effectively against these criteria. So there's different chapters. They're related to environmental criteria, human rights criteria, governance, or kind of like the management practices on the farm itself that can allow them to facilitate this claim. The last component, or one, I shouldn't say the last component, but an important component of this pie is the auditing process itself. So it's a third-party audit. So what this means is that a certification body, which is kind of an external and uninterested counterparty, is hired to come in and to audit against that criteria in RA standard. And so that's where the credibility and the strength of the sustainability claim comes from in the end, because this uninterested counterparty is coming in, they're reviewing the performance effectively against the standard itself, which is what facilitates the claim. And so this is what gives consumers the confidence that the commodity is sustainably produced, and so that the coffee is sustainable.
There's a third party comparing what is happening on the ground to the certification you guys have developed, to the standards you've developed. Money is always in play here. The coffee market is wildly dependent on or wildly impactful on economy. You mentioned small farmers, and that's something I kind of was like, oh, that's interesting. What does this cost the farm? If I'm a small farmer and I can't, my local farmer here in San Diego doesn't have organic certification. I know he's growing things organically because we've discussed it. He's open to letting people visit his farm, but he doesn't want to pay for the certification. How do you create a system in which farmers, especially small ones, can be engaged in this way and get the advantage of having this label on their bag or on their product?
Yeah. This is a good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because it's kind of a common constraint among certifications, precisely because this auditing process is expensive. You're talking about human capacity and people actually going out into the field and checking things. Oftentimes in very rural communities, it's not so difficult. It's not so easy, in some cases to reach and to spend the time that's needed in order to go through a very detailed list of criteria, like our standard. It's not something that's lost on us. It's also been a challenge, I think, that a lot of third-party certification schemes have had to manage over the years. And there's a few mechanisms in play that allow us to reach more smallholders. You'll see, for example, in the list of RA certificate holders, many of them are cooperatives. So, for example, in countries like Brazil, Colombia, like all across Central America, you'll see large cooperatives, organizations who manage certification on behalf of the farms that are party to their certifications, their license, effectively. And you'll see a lot of groups organized this way. With the co-op model in play, those costs can be distributed across the group in a way. And then central administration of the certificate is really helpful, because there's a lot of administration that's required on things like traceability in order to maintain the chain of custody of a container of coffee from point A to point B. It requires a great deal of steps that are sometimes not necessarily super clear to people who are outside the sector or not working in this stuff day to day, but which does require a lot of deliberate effort. So that's one kind of aggregation model that we see in play that can help. Of course, we also see exporters playing a really significant role in this as well. This is an area where some of my work becomes relevant, precisely because these exporters, trade organizations effectively help to also to aggregate sometimes small farmers who are otherwise maybe completely disaggregated. They might not even have strong access to markets or buyers in destination countries. And if they do have them, sometimes those relationships can be fraught by things that are completely outside our control. For example, right now, the coffee market is undergoing a really great period of volatility. As I'm sure you've seen, we're seeing sometimes 20-cent intraday swings in the C market. Like, from my point of view, this is a really, really difficult operating environment. You're trying to trade coffee at scale. So all of which is to say, it is a challenge with certification. I think it's also an opportunity for improvement and one area in which the Rainforest Alliance, as a standard setter and as a certification scheme, reacts to volatility, increased coffee prices sometimes, is by making sure that we're being present in conversations with our certificate holders, soliciting feedback from them on supply, on demand, what's happening in the market, where do we see more opportunities for engagement or investment to help to facilitate the demand or the supply necessary to meet consumer demand on certified commodities, which is continuing to grow.
Something that's going to run through my head here for a minute or two, and that is, when I donate my $50 or my $100 or whatever, just as an individual to the Rainforest Alliance, hearing about that certification, the efforts and the need to, in some cases, co-op or figure out how the farmer is going to afford this or the exporter is going to afford it. Is there any sort of scholarship programming or any sort of bucket that coffee people like me can be like, hey, this is kind of what I want to support? This might be a little bit off base, but I was thinking to myself, if I could create a kind of a drip of money going to support a farming community directly to help sustain their certification process so that they could focus on, doing the work that they're doing in the right way, or what we've determined to be the right way from the outside to some extent, that would be kind of a cool option. I don't know if that's even something that is available.
Yeah, definitely. And RA is a global organization, so we have colleagues in various offices all around the world working precisely on these topics. I mean, as a charitable organization, I mean, as an NGO, we're constantly soliciting opportunities from partners in the market, companies who are in the trade, so to speak, are working under the banner of certification to advance sustainable agriculture in these forest communities. And so we see direct investment with companies. That's one way in which your listeners, if they're representing these companies, that's one way in which we're able to channel support to farmers and coffee supply chains globally. Certification plays a role in that, but we also have companies that are working on really ambitious projects all over the world to support maybe really acute sustainability issues. Maybe it might be related to livelihoods or human rights. Deforestation is really topical right now because a variety of reasons. Beyond this, we also receive support from some individuals. We do have means via our website and through our some of my colleagues in some of these offices who are working on individual philanthropy to help this support. But that is all to say, in my view, the best way to support RA and some of this mission is to look out for that frog. Basically, if you see the frog seal on a bag of coffee at the supermarket and want to give it a swing, you'll be able to walk away with the knowledge that purchase is helping to support a global mission and one that's linked intimately to the sustainability of coffee.
I mean, that leads me to my question as somebody who's sitting here in Southern California. Why should I care about what the rainforest does? I don't live in the rainforest, my audience probably doesn't live in the rainforest, although it'd be cool if they did. Why is this important? We're talking about it as if it is, but why is it?
I think about this a lot too, Ryan. I live in Colorado's Front Range, and from my desk, I can look out the window and see, at least in the distance. So I can't see individual trees. I'm not that close, but I can see that there's some stuff going on out there. And when the summer comes around and the air turns sour and smoky because we have fires ongoing and other things. I mean, we saw tragically this past winter the impact of forest fires in Southern California, I mean, in Los Angeles County. And for me, those are inflection points where I do think that our communities are more closely linked with rainforest communities than we might know, because humanity's future depends on these forests. It's more relevant than ever as we see the accelerating effects of climate change and the impact of forests in mitigating some of the more acute impacts of climate change. These ecosystems are vital. We see agriculture as a particularly acute threat to forest degradation in a lot of in a lot of tropical forests and rainforests. So that's one acute reason why I think we should be cognizant of them, even if maybe we don't have the opportunity to go and visit them very frequently. That's one urgent reason, in my view, to pay attention to what's happening here. We also see challenges in the coffee sector that are related to climate change that are maybe more unique than in other sectors that RA works in, particularly because our friend, the Arabica coffee plant, is particularly needy. It's a sensitive plant, and it likes to grow in very particular conditions. With a diurnal cycle that's quite exaggerated, and one in which, if you're looking at a mountainside and you're growing coffee currently at 1,200 meters above sea level, and you're noticing that it's becoming more difficult every single year to achieve the same yields that you had 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, or cup quality, or any other, consideration. And you look up the slope, you see that there's also, a couple hundred meters of room up the mountainside, but it's all heavily forested. And, like you can't really, if you're a farmer, there's not really a whole lot of options left. And so we try and look at this picture with a holistic view, one that considers the pragmatic needs to operate a farm in a way that it is, financially sustainable for the farmer themselves, but I think also one in which allows them to mitigate some of the more acute impacts of climate change. So for this reason, we're looking at things like regenerative agriculture or regenerative approaches to coffee production that can help to reduce the use of things like inputs, chemical herbicide applications, also things like cover cropping and agroforestry, which can also help to, if you're not reversing some of the more harmful effects of climate change, it might actually just at least create an ability to mitigate some of the more nasty bits. So it's a holistic answer. It's a complicated question, but I think it's also one that humanity's future depends upon. Certainly if we want to continue drinking coffee in the future. We might have coffee. I don't mean to be like super over dramatic, but it might just not be your 90-point geisha, banger that's like singing floral, singing high citrus acidity, like all of these amazing things that we love about specialty coffee, and that I personally fell in love with when I first kind of got into coffee in a serious way. My hope is that we can continue to have those experiences and those coffees well into the future.
That brings me to this idea, ways that we have an impact on our life. And the reason we want to have an impact is because there's I think, an innate desire in people to leave things better than they found them, or at least as good. Do you have a piece of advice, maybe something you've learned in this process of transitioning from specialty to the rainforest, or anything you'd like to share with us? In particular, I think I'm asking about how you maintain a level of optimism and hope.
Yeah.
You just mentioned you don't want to be dramatic, but I worked at an environmental nonprofit, and one of the things I wasn't prepared for was the emotional impact of it. And so how do those of us out here in the world who maybe don't have as much information, how do we maintain that optimism? How do you do that?
I think it's a great question, and it's not always easy. I mean, you look at the news and you see, like I alluded to, recent news in California, for example, and trying to reflect on what's coming through, my iPhone screen and my own work can sometimes be difficult. And I think that this is, maybe I'd be naive to think that all is well and good and that we'll have a very prosperous future in coffee, because there's really acute challenges. Like I mentioned right now, this volatility that could put immense strain on the coffee sector. I mean, there's a lot of things that I reflect on now since I've had this experience at the Rainforest Alliance, also working more in commercial coffee, not necessarily as much specialty, that makes me nervous. And I try and compartmentalize. I try and do what I can to kind of get through my days. I reflect also on my past experiences and some of the leaders that I've had the benefit of working with in the past, and some of the sagely advice that they've given me about where things have been and how far we've come, both in just facilitating more forums for pre-competitive discussion, co-investment, more and more consumers being increasingly savvy about where their coffee comes from, the kind of coffee that they like. I think being willing and able to justify paying more to understand and to really command that the coffee that they're drinking is fundamentally, if not good for the planet, is at least not doing more harm than it otherwise could have been. Like I reflect on some of the first times I had opportunities to visit coffee farms when I was with Intelligentsia, and I'd be walking around and I'd see this Rainforest Alliance frog on these farms in Brazil. And I'd be looking at them and be like, wait, so this farm is certified. I'm not talking about this. Like, I didn't think we even knew that these farms were certified. We were buying these specialty grade coffees and, talking about direct trade. The farms that we were working with, Intelli had been buying coffee from for over a decade. Long-term relationships, growing together hand in hand for most of that time, right? And, it really caused me to consider more. And I think fundamentally the one thing that has gotten me through hurdles in the road is I don't think it's anything like necessarily resembling like an unyielding optimism, but it's more or less just a curiosity, like I'll see things like that and I'll think to myself, what's going on here? Is there another piece to the story that I'm missing that I haven't really grasped yet? And that has led me to expand my network to try and seek out allies in the sector who are doing cool work, interesting work, and ambitious work to ensure that we all have a prosperous future in coffee. And that's kind of what's prodded me along, to be honest with you. Like a week or so ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Houston for the National Coffee Association event, which was revelatory for me. I mean, I've alluded to this a few times in our conversation, but this volatility that we're experiencing in coffee is historic without question. You're seeing high coffee prices in the C market. Fundamentally, I think high coffee prices are a good thing in my personal view, because this means that cost of production and the incentives associated with high coffee prices are less of an acute problem. Like if we had this conversation a few years ago, we may have been talking about cost of production, difficulty finding labor to help to support the coffee production and coffee picking in a lot of coffee producing countries. And now we're on the other side of that conversation. The things that I'm seeing now and that I'm understanding now, I don't think I would have been able to perceive a few years ago when I was working in specialty, to be frank, because I'm seeing the other potential ramifications of not necessarily high prices, but volatility. I mentioned when we see really hyperbolic swings, like one day to the next, 20, 30 cents, one or the other, it creates an operating environment for people who are actually like physically trading coffee. I'm not talking about the futures or any speculation in the coffee market that might be coming from Wall Street or other places. Basically, people who have no real intention of physically buying or roasting coffee, but it makes the environment really difficult. And, when I was in Houston, there was a lot of conversation about this and how we would weather the storm collectively. And I think ultimately preserve the investments that have already been made in sustainability and in our sector. So that's my view. It's not always easy with what's in the news and everything else that's really outside of my control. I can really only focus on touching the couple of people who cross my path every day or so in the sector, but that's all we can do, right?
Is there a mandate when you join the Rainforest Alliance that you get the frog tattooed on you somewhere? I just want to make sure everyone knows.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I've thought about this because we've been having conversations with colleagues about SCA, which happens again in Houston in a couple weeks' time, and we're all excited to go and to meet friends and taste some beautiful coffee. And we're thinking, okay, maybe we should get some swag. Like, it's in Houston, and I was thinking, man, we should do a frog belt buckle. I thought that would be a sweet idea. And but no one else is bitten. I don't know why. Maybe my ideas aren't so good.
I hope there's green rhinestones of some kind along.
Oh, definitely.
what did I, miss, or what is there anything about the Rainforest Alliance that we need to make sure we cover, in our time here today, or the best way for us to support the Rainforest Alliance? You already mentioned, obviously, looking for the logo, but beyond that.
Yeah, certainly. I think this is the where it really starts and stops for me. I mean, most of the financial support that RA receives is directly derived from the certification program and from consumption of RA certified coffee. So that would be my call to arms for the audience is to seek out the frog, try the coffees. If you're in touch with your local roasters, maybe they're curious about certification or entering the space. I mean, that's where my recommendation would lie.
Is there a database of coffees or companies or people that are achieving the certification, or how do we know that? Is it on the the roaster or the exporter to display that? I mean, how do people
Yeah.
find out what it is besides just physically seeing it on the shelf?
So we maintain like a list on our website of the certificate holders, basically, both the farms, I should say, and the roasters. And so you can filter by region. You can look and try and find roasters near you who are buying Rainforest Alliance certified coffee. Many of them are very proud to talk about it and perceive the value of very positively of the investment that they're making in sustainability via their coffee purchasing. So that's one way. We also try and we're trying more to talk about this and to make sure we're providing visibility on these companies, because in our view, these guys are at the cutting edge of sustainability in coffee. My hope is that we can also in time see this work its way more into specialty coffee. One of the things that I've reflected on in the past in coffee is that, like I said, I visit these farms and maybe you're buying certified coffees, but you don't necessarily know it. You don't maintain custody of that certification and continue to discuss it also in turn with your clients, which for me is just in hindsight, it's like a missed opportunity. I was talking to big buyers of Intelli coffees in the States, and in many circumstances, that would have been a great feather, I think, in our cap to be able to discuss, but maybe we just didn't know about it. And so that the onus there is on me now and our team to make sure that coffee buyers and companies are aware of the value that their coffee and their contribution to these supply chains is effectively making. Because these days, like, it's more important than ever. We had as a global NGO, for example, I don't need to wade too much into politics, but for example, with the shuttering of USAID and associated development funding, international development funding, we saw immediate ramifications in our own little organization. And so that is also true of many partners in coffee globally who are working really hard to push for a sustainable future for coffee. So I think now more than ever, this sort of intentionality on the consumer side is super important, because sometimes we can't rely on the state or others to continue to advance the mission.
I think living as an intentional human is a daily challenge, but one that comes with a lot of its own rewards. You mentioned that you are in Colorado. At some point,
Yep.
I assume you're crossing that distance between where you sit and those trees. I know I certainly would. Assuming you
Yep.
come across a good coffee shop along the way, what are you going to order?
Well, I'm not that interesting, when it comes to coffee. I usually just, try and be unobtrusive and ask for whatever drip coffee is made. But I do have preferences. I'm not such a big advocate for naturally processed coffees. I know this can be a kind of a hot button topic, but it's not that I haven't had fantastic ones. There's beautiful naturals and everything, but usually my preference is just for, if there's a nice washed coffee, if it happens to be from East Africa, awesome. If not, also awesome. And I'll usually go for that. But I'm a little spoiled here in Colorado. We have a bunch of really terrific roasters who are doing great work. Many of them are pretty close to home as well. So if I'm on my way up to the mountains, I can squeeze in, grab a quick drip and roll. In the past, I love to drink and to fiddle and to to mess around with brew methods and stuff. But I think as I've gotten older, and maybe as my palate has just become more and more junk, I just have my preferred method and stick to it.
Kevin, I really appreciate that you took the time this morning. Obviously, this is a crazy time in the world of coffee, and also, as you mentioned, in the world of nonprofits. Funding is a really interesting, intricate part of our economy. So if you're out there listening, and this sounds of something of value, please take a look at those links. They're going to be in our show notes. They'll be in our newsletter when that comes out. I certainly appreciate you all being here. And again, that's rainforest-alliance.org. You can find our newsletter at roastwestcoast.com. And thank you for listening, everyone. Kevin, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate your time.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming back for another episode of our Coffee People podcast. That's our show for today. Thanks to our guests for sharing their time, their story, and dropping a little bit of knowledge on all of us. I always appreciate the advice. You can find a recap of this episode in our newsletter at roastwestcoast.com. That and all the links we chatted about today are in this podcast's show notes. Wherever you're listening or watching, it really helps us if you tap the follow or subscribe button on this show. While you're there, please give us a few stars. If you want to go beyond that to support the Coffee People podcast, please tell a friend, share this episode, or click the link to buy us a cup of coffee. We really appreciate you. As we do our presenting sponsor, Roastar Coffee Packaging. You can find them online at roastar.com. They help coffee businesses best represent the quality beans that they are producing. Besides enabling us to share these coffee stories, they also have a team of people who go above and beyond to ensure that their customers get the support they need. Click the link in this show's notes to learn more, or reach out to us, and we'll connect you directly. To all of our industry partners who've supported us, still support us, and continually uplift this effort to share the stories of coffee people, thank you too. I hope we get to have a cup of coffee soon. And it's never enough to say it, but to everyone listening and watching this podcast, asking us questions, sharing your coffee with us, and being coffee curious, you're amazing. Thank you very much for being part of the show. This episode, and all of the episodes of the Coffee People podcast, are part of the Roast West Coast Coffee Network. This episode has been written, produced, researched, and recorded by me, Ryan Woldt. Wherever you find yourself today, I hope it's with a fine cup of coffee. Thank you for listening to us tell the stories of coffee people. Cheers, everyone.